Hi, and welcome. This is Mark Kilby, Agile Coach at Sonatype. Uh, Today, we've got a great story to share with you about how we do Agile at Sonatype. A little bit about me. I'm an Agile Coach for many years now, actually over 20 years in software and over 10 years as an Agile Coach in various organizations, small and large, right up to the Fortune 20. And very pleased to have with me today Mike Hansen, who will tell you a little bit about himself and Sonatype. Go ahead, Mike.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mike Hansen again. I'm the head of engineering for Sonatype. I've been with Sonatype now for about 3 years, a little over 20 years in software overall, with a ton of time in development, and more recently, a lot more time on leadership roles. Sonatype has really been focused on developing tools to streamline application development. And that includes, as I'm sure many people here today are aware, the Nexus Repository Manager, which I think at the end of August, we had 42,000 active installs covering perhaps a few million users. Pretty hard to know exactly how many users there are, but it's fairly pervasive install. And more recently, we've been developing a number of solutions that really help manage the effective use of the enormous amount of high-value open source software that is available as building blocks for applications. So that is me in the back with a funny-looking hat, and I'm there along with a number of colleagues, and as well as Sonatype's CEO, Wayne Jackson, who's in the front right there. And I think at this point, Wayne and I have shared 26 summits to date. And here we're standing atop Mount Elbert, which is the tallest peak in Colorado. It's a little over 14,400 feet. Getting up there, resulted in what was a really long day overall, with about a mile of vertical over a round trip of about 9 miles. I'd say despite the physical demands, there really is a singular focus to get to the top of the mountain and, of course, back down, all of it safely, dodging lightning bolts along the way sometimes. But the way to get there is nothing more than one step at a time. And while climbing them is a bit of a grind, it's slow, steady progress that often feels like you're watching the hour hand on a clock. But every once in a while you look back and you realize how far you've come. And I think that parallels many aspects of building an effective Agile discipline, with its focus on continually improving, moving forward most of the time, while occasionally suffering some setbacks before progress resumes. And in a lot of cases, it doesn't feel like progress is being made, but just like climbing, you occasionally take a step back and you really do have a lot to feel good about. So in the summer of 2011, I had lunch with my current boss, Wayne, which unexpectedly, at least to me, turned into a bit of a recruiting meeting. And it's pretty hard to say no to a guy that has had $2 billion exits previously. I think the SourceFire was sold to Cisco about a year ago for $2.7 billion. And while Wayne wasn't at the helm at the time, he's certainly instrumental in ultimately creating significant value there. Sonatype's relatively small engineering team of 15 or so at that time was spread over the world, all over the world. And that came up in the discussion, and it was really stuck out to me. And so we had people in Brazil, in Canada, China, several places in Europe, the UK, and the United States. And I worked in many different organizational topologies, from sitting in a bullpen on University Boulevard in Palo Alto to regional development centers across the globe. But everyone working individually in many different places was a totally foreign concept to me. And I have to say, I was rather skeptical. While the bullpen type environment, with the small, tight-knit team is certainly ideal, what I found is that the upsides of the virtual model and the results we've been able to achieve have far exceeded my expectations in the 3+ years I've been leading the engineering team. There are, of course, challenges, and we'll talk about some of them here, but every organization has challenges. And the distributed model that we've embraced and continue to iterate on, and that's important, as you'll certainly see, really has been a differentiator for us.
So like Mike, I've also worked in a number of different organizations where team members were in some ways distributed, but you might have collections of the team co-located with remote members spread out, or teams distributed but located in different locations and time zones. But what's unique about Sonatype, as Mike indicated, is we have 100% distributed engineering team. What this allows us to do is to get the most talented folks from around the globe. And the great thing about it is they get to work in the environment they prefer. They set their own environment. And there's no moving costs. There's no office costs. And for many of us, there's no commutes that we have to worry about. And so it creates a better work-life blend for where they are. So here's an example of one of the home offices of our lead developer. So, why pay for office space when you can create your own killer home setup like this, complete with PVR? We'll assume this photo was taken after hours, of course. But the advantage is that each person can work the way they want, in the environment they want, within the working agreements of the team that they're in. So every employee is given this autonomy, and they don't have to worry about office interruptions unless they allow them through the virtual channels.
So we have a pretty experienced team. It's greater than 10 years on average. And while I don't think that this average level of experience is required to be effective, we've had ready access to that level of experience given the geography that we can recruit from, which is pretty much worldwide. That said, there is some minimum level of experience required. And for example, it's a lot more difficult to mentor people on the more basic aspects of work and software development craftsmanship at a distance. A limited number of mature, really strong interns has certainly worked out for us, and we've had a few that are still with us. But I would say that overall, the most important ingredient is innate self-drive. And that generally is not a problem for good engineers, as we've certainly found out. And so with an effective agile process and teams full of strong engineers, there is just nowhere to hide non-performance. And I'd say it's clear rather quickly when somebody needs help, isn't pulling their weight, though honestly, that just hasn't been a challenge for us. Most members of the organization have had some degree of experience with Agile, and many actively contribute to open source projects, but I really don't think those are requirements, because we've had people come in that haven't had that experience, and they've ultimately thrived in our environment without any issue at all. We have a rather unique organizational structure, but ultimately I think it's one that really leads to effective collaboration throughout the organization, which is incredibly important when you're developing software. It's a highly collaborative endeavor, obviously. So that is me at the bottom, and you really can't get any flatter than this organizational structure. Well, I guess they could toss me out, but I pretty much tend to stay well out of the way the vast majority of the time anyway, and never more than a chat message or phone call away. But with the general level of experience and expertise we have on the team, we've been able to thrive without requiring a bunch of hierarchy, which is equivalent basically to unnecessary overhead, or overhead, I should say. Some hierarchy, in a large organization is obviously going to be required. And while we don't have a bunch of managers, we absolutely do have plenty of leaders, and they are not reflected in that diagram. There are clear lines of responsibility, though rather than being imposed on the organization, these have tended to emerge over time as we've grown and evolved and added people to the team. And we're always working to keep people in their highest leverage roles. It becomes clear to everyone, ultimately who the major influencers are. The folks on the team know who they are going to follow. That's just kind of innate human behavior. And the meritocratic nature of how we work is really a not so obvious yet extremely important ingredient to our overall effectiveness. It also acts as a really good filter when you're recruiting. People that care about things like title or where they are in the organizational hierarchy probably aren't going to be too comfortable with this. People that just want to develop awesome software, however, ultimately love it. I mean, they just don't have any pointy-haired managers to deal with in this case. A highly functioning virtual development organization wouldn't be possible without the effective use of modern online collaboration tooling, the vast majority of it cloud-based. And while clearly not as good as face-to-face communication, things like Google Hangouts, HipChat video, and audio, whatnot, can significantly help in bridging the distance gap. That said, we still get the entire engineering organization together once a year and have smaller team meetups several times per year. And those smaller meetups, tend to be ad hoc. I mean, it's obvious when you need them. You're undergoing or starting a major, development effort, and you want to get together for collaborative design sessions, stuff where you got to work stuff out on, whiteboards and other elements like that with a lot of back and forth. The physical proximity really helps in those cases, and you really need to do it. But the combination of these limited get-togethers, modern collaboration tooling, and importantly, agile methods have really been the key enablers to our ability to operate in a completely virtual context.
So before I had joined, Mike and the rest of the team, most of the work was done very much like open source projects. But as the organization grew, that became a little more difficult to use that organic approach. And so with that, one of the ways that we've maintained that flat hierarchy is by adopting agile approaches, Scrum in particular, and it's allowed us to continue to grow, but still maintain that loose structure within our organization. So with that, product owners set a long-term vision through that backlog of features. And this is not just the product owners doing this by themselves, but really collaborating with the team to determine what are the best set of features to build out next, not only based on business needs, but on technical feasibility. So there's that constant collaboration with the teams. And so with that, the teams work with the product owners to select what are those next most important features to build out. And they also collaborate daily on the progress of the current iteration with the product owners usually involved in those daily stand-ups. What we discovered, though, is fed back into not only the product, but how the teams work. And so this allows us to quickly adjust, not only on an iteration basis, but also with that daily synchronization. So sometimes things are discovered in the sprint that we find something may not be feasible that we originally thought, or we see some different approaches that might come up with a better solution. And that daily synchronization allows us to do those quick adjustments. So what I found in joining the teams here at Sonatype, through the use of this through the agile processes, there's almost little to no drama. There are some surprises at times, but really because of the flexibility that the agile processes give us, we're able to adjust very quickly, and there's no major upsets that we take away from that. So this lightweight guidance of agile methodologies allows us to maintain that flexibility on a day-to-day basis and accomplish the goals set for the business. So we kind of see this as a shifting from our original organic roots from open source to a more guided approach through agile techniques. So with our origins in open source and now agile principles, one of the things that we continue to carry with us and we think is key to our success is this concept of continuous improvement. So every iteration, we're looking at how we can build things better, how we can work as a team better, and also how we can deliver value better to our customers. So we've been doing that for well over a year now within our Agile teams, almost 2 years. And now we're looking at how we take that continuous improvement mindset outside of engineering to other parts of Sonatype. And so it's very exciting to see how we can now adjust and inspect and adapt with sales, with marketing, with the executive team. And so we're very much looking forward to a broader application of continuous improvement throughout Sonatype. We feel like another key part of our success is that open source mindset. So many of our engineers, as Mike said, are open source contributors or extensive open source users. And with that, they have that open source attitude. Transparency is a big part of that. Being very willing to share both good and bad. Rapid prototyping is another one. And most importantly, craftsmanship. So there's tremendous pride amongst our engineers in their work. And with that, they're constantly seeking to improve themselves and even challenging each other to improve themselves. As part of that, once they feel that part of the process is in good shape, then we seek to automate that. So much of that has been applied to testing, for instance, where we will take some of our current testing processes and automate those quite heavily. Also, there's extensive peer review as part of that craftsmanship mindset. So and it's not just within a team, it's also across teams. And so with that open source craftsmanship, we feel has extended many different ways throughout our engineering teams and is one of the keys to our success.
So we've talked a lot about the benefits of a distributed team, the advantages. There are definitely some pitfalls. I don't think that there's, well, in fact, I know that there's nothing that we have not been able to get over at this point through kind of iterating and refining and adapting. A lot of it has to do with when you change team structure. That could be you move people between teams, you add a new person to the organization. The biggest, the most volatile aspect of team dynamics is certainly, the interpersonal relationships with the team members. So as the organizational structure changes, you constantly have to be on the lookout. But it can also be influenced by the nature of the work as well. So ultimately, we'll talk about some of the aspects of how we contended with that here. So our teams really move very fast, and they produce extraordinarily high quality results. But it definitely took a while to get the product management discipline, in a highly functioning state. I think we've had the right raw materials all along. We've got some phenomenal product managers and product owners. But we really needed to iterate and experiment for a while to get where we are today. We had to put a significant investment into the product owner discipline and product management in general, really focusing on aligning everybody within engineering, as well as the folks, throughout the overall organization. Additionally, a great deal of focus has been on optimizing the planning process itself. For instance, we've had good success in spreading the product owner role around via a product owner team. Certain people own certain key features and help answer questions coming from the team rather than one person as the key answer man. The real point, though, is not what we do at Sonatype, but ultimately how we got to where we are today. And so much of what works and what doesn't is a function of the people involved, as I said before. And so what works for us could lead to abject failure somewhere else. So you have to constantly inspect and adapt and be nimble throughout that process.
So another thing that we've discovered is when we have to make some changes in direction, some pivots, as it were, to use some lean startup terminology, is we have to remember to give ourselves a little bit more time to communicate and coordinate that change in direction. So one of the things I've been very impressed with since I've been here at Sonatype is how we have been very slow to grow the team and very deliberate in how we add members to the team. But even as we add members to the team, we have to keep in mind how that changes connections between team members. So Mike actually wrote a really great blog post on this on our site about how even if you increase your team members on a linear scale, as you see here in the diagram, the blue in the diagram in particular, as you add people gradually, you have to keep in mind that the connections between those people increase exponentially. And so with that, as you have a change in direction, you also have to let that change kind of percolate through those group of connections. You have to be aware of it takes time to really have everyone absorb what does this change mean, how does it impact the teams, how does it impact the architecture, and as Mike said earlier, sometimes that we realize it's going to require some face-to-face conversations, or it's going to take some slower progress for our high-speed teams. We have to kind of work our way through what the changes are and what the implications are. And sometimes it might even include some customers as we vet certain new features in a beta form. So having those 2-week cycles, those 2-week iterations can be a tremendous help in checking in and seeing, is everyone in sync? Is everyone kind of flying together? Kind of referring back to that last picture we had up there. And it's also key for having the product management involved, not only at the beginning and end of those iterations, but really have them involved day to day with the teams to make sure that those pivots or those changes are still being carried out with the team. Another thing that we've learned quite a bit about is those enablers, those tools we talked about earlier. So one question I always get is, what is the best tool for distributed teams? And it's the wrong question. The better question to ask is, what is the best collection of tools for you to use with your teams at the present time? That enabling technology, the set of tools we showed earlier, is really changing all the time. And even how you might use those tools can change from time to time. So there is no silver bullet tool. There's no single tool that you're going to find. You'll have different tools for different aspects of the communication and the planning and the coordination. And you also want to check in with your teams on how they're using those tools and what's working with the current tool set and what's not working, and what you might want to swap out in your toolbox so that the teams are able to communicate and coordinate their work as efficiently as possible. For us, we tend to swap out tools roughly every 3 to 6 months. And in some cases, it might be tools we've used previously, but we've discovered some new ways we can use them. Or it can be some completely different tools. But what's important is to make sure that you keep checking in with your teams, that they have the right tools at the right time so that they can communicate and coordinate. So we don't want to end the story here. But we are running out of time in this webinar. So we want to encourage you to go to our Nexus community site, where we're going to continue to share some of the lessons learned in many different aspects of our journey. So for me in particular, I'll be sharing stories about what we're learning as we execute Agile on our distributed teams. And so I've already started a couple blog posts on the site, and we'll continue to post a new article every month. And Mike, I think you had some other things that you wanted to share about the site as well.
Sure, I've posted a number of things recently regarding the culture here at Sonatype, engineering specifically. But I'm always happy to share experience with anyone who's interested or has questions, as well as discuss other seemingly counterintuitive approaches that ultimately provide notable value. I've talked to a number of people in terms of this structure, the vast majority of them with a lot of surprise, but very intrigued by the fact that it actually works for us. And so while we have definitely learned a lot about the complexity and challenges of the virtual structure, I don't think there's any question we can continue to optimize and improve. So again, happy to continue collaborating with anybody of interest on the site there. So to recap, it's been a great journey so far. And my initial negative reaction to the completely distributed team has really, I think, been proven incorrect. Access to talent is perhaps the greatest challenge in building any effective engineering team. And for a small to medium organization, a virtual structure lowers that barrier tremendously. There are even situations where this has been done at scale, such as Red Hat. I don't have much experience with that, but I know they are doing it at a much, much larger scale than we are. And yes, you definitely have to invest in some different areas and use different compensating mechanisms, but you really need nothing more than a willingness to begin the journey and a desire to iterate, learn, and adapt. And I think the results, in our case, are proving themselves. So thank you for your time, and I believe we have a section or a period for questions as well.
All right. So this is Mark Kilby. We have many great questions queued up. Mike, I think you were going to take one of the first ones, right?
All right. I think the first one I had was how many Scrum teams are there in the organization? I think this was asked a few different times. And how many simultaneous sprints do we have? We do try to minimize the amount of cross-team dependencies to the extent practical. Obviously, you can't do completely eliminate that. But to the extent that the teams can operate independently, obviously there's benefit. We have several teams across the organization, and it isn't specific just to the development practice. We actually have a product owner team and kind of an overall product management function that spans multiple product lines. But in terms of development teams, we have 3 actually.
All right, thanks, Mike. So another one that came in, let me get it pushed out to the screen here, was more of a comment, but I think it was also a great question. It said, you barely said anything about Agile, and that was exactly the point. As we said in the early part of the presentation, Mike and I have both been doing Agile in various organizations. I was even a consulting coach that worked with many organizations. And when I came on board at Sonatype, I was not pleasantly, but exceedingly surprised at how well the teams were using Scrum out of the box. So it is actually a pure Scrum implementation. So we have planning sessions. We have backlog grooming, or now referred to as backlog refinement. We have daily stand-ups. We have sprint reviews. We have retrospectives. Not all teams are doing that yet. There are a couple teams that are doing pure Scrum, some that are still coming up to speed with some of that. But it's mostly a Scrum implementation. There's some other things that we're adding in, and there's some variations because of our distributed nature. And that's why when the folks at Atlassian asked us to do this talk, they asked us more about the culture and how we're doing that. And so we wanted to share a little bit more about that with you, but we're going to be sharing more of the details on our Nexus community site that we mentioned. So Mike, did you have another one that you wanted to pick? Oh, I think Mike might be having some audio problems. So let me.
Nope, sorry about that.
Oh,
the next one is how do we deal with managing costs with employees in various states? Is it worth it? I think that is an intriguing one. My sense is, I believe that the question is asking, whether or not variability in salary and whatnot. Sonatype is a bit different in that regard. I think we offer very competitive compensation. I think generally my philosophy is that you don't ever want anybody in the engineering organization thinking about compensation. unless it's a surprise and you've had a discussion with them and you told them you were giving them a raise and they weren't expecting it, or a bonus or something like that. If compensation is on the developer's mind at any other time, I think that's a bit of a problem. It's usually a bad thing. So we pay very competitive salaries, and we don't look nearly as much as what is the compensation in a particular geographic region, but more, I mean, there's an element of that, but it's much more, what do we believe is an equitable compensation for the individual? And so a lot of that is based on the history, their work experience, and other aspects like that. And on balance, I'd say that given the seniority within the organization, the significant experience that we have across the team, I'd argue that we're, on balance, have very competitive cost structure overall.
Cool. Thanks, Mike. So this is Mark. I'll go ahead and take the next one here. So lots of great questions around this. But basically, the question that I picked out was, are retrospectives more difficult with a distributed team? Yes and no. So not a trick question, or trick answer, I should say. There's certainly some challenges to running retrospectives with a distributed team. But if you're familiar with the book Agile Retrospectives, and if you've used some of the retrospective exercises in that book, a lot of those can be translated into a distributed environment. Google Docs is a wonderful set of tools for that, and in our Nexus community site, I'll take an action to say a little bit more about our retrospectives, and I have a bunch of links I can share about some of the tools and templates that I use in running those. So always happy to talk about retrospectives on that one. So Mike, did you have another one?
Sure. The question was, does product manage engineering resourcing here? Product management is completely responsible for defining the priorities in the product itself. We have an extremely technical product management function, given we work on developer tooling and related technologies. But product doesn't actually, control the resources. They don't report up through product management, but ultimately through the nature of the backlog management, what is getting prioritized, ultimately that leads to what the development discipline is focused on.
All right. So I have another one here that just popped up, and this one frequently comes up. Oh, sorry, just lost it. Oh, there we go. Sorry. Trying to get this pushed out to the screen here. So the question of time zones and how do you make this work across different time zones? So I'll say that's an area where we have some good solutions, but I don't think we're satisfied with the solutions yet. So some of the things that we've done, we have team members right now from Eastern Europe to the West Coast of the U.S. And again, all the engineering staff in particular working out of their homes. And so one of the things we've done is with some of the teams, we have arranged them by near time zones. So they might be only 2 or 3 time zones apart. Some are further. So we have one team that has some folks in the U.S. East Coast, a little bit of central, U.S. Central time zone, and then some in Europe. There's others, because of their expertise, they're spread out much further in time zones, and so it's a little harder to coordinate their meetings. And so we've had to try some different experiments, again, that Agile philosophy of inspecting and adapting and trying different things. And so we're trying different things with them on can we do something different from with the meetings? Do we have them at different times? Do we split them up with different parts of the team? So we're still kind of experimenting with that particular team to see what works best for them. They're not quite big enough to split yet, and their expertise is kind of crucial to keep them together as a team. So it's like with all things Agile, you need to keep experimenting to see what works best with your situation. But the main thing we do is we try to group people in closer time zones, and we try to let the teams decide meeting times and things like that that work best for them based on that. So Mike, did you have another one?
I do. The question was, how do you that people are fully engaged in their jobs? Thankfully, that is kind of self-policing in our organization. And I think if you have an effective Agile discipline, there is extensive transparency. Other people on the team, if you're having daily standings, you understand what your peers do. So we do not require any, kind of command and control hierarchy in the organization. That's why we have, or, I guess having such a flat organization like we do, when you have the appropriate mechanisms in place, the whole thing just, kind of works itself out. I think that combined with the significant experience level that we have on the team, it's just, there's no way you could get away with not being fully engaged. Now that said, I have an open door policy, a virtual open door policy in this case, and I implore people, if they're having any problems at all, to reach out. When we have new people come aboard, I have routine checks and check in with them on a regular basis, make sure they have what they need, that they understand what they're trying to achieve, and that they're being successful. And in all honesty, we just have had no issues whatsoever with underperformance, which has been great.
All right, so let me grab another one that gets a little bit more into some nuts and bolts of how we work. So there was the question of daily reviews, and are they done over the phone only? So this applies to not just, I'm assuming the person is asking about daily stand-ups, but daily stand-ups, sprint reviews, sprint planning, retrospectives, each one is done a little bit differently, and sometimes, well, actually, it does vary from team to team. So for some of our meetings, we're in a Google Hangout, where we're face-to-face. It's usually a much smaller group, 3 to 4 people in those cases, and pulling up what we need into the Hangout, sharing screens and sharing video. For stand-ups, we keep that pretty low-tech, usually just phone, people looking at the task board in their browser, so we're not even pulling up a web meeting for that, because we know people are referring to things in the task board. We'll occasionally pull in burn down charts in the daily stand-ups as well. And also for all these meetings, there is a chat thread, so there's always a back channel. So that if somebody has problem with audio, if somebody has problem with Google Hangout or whatever, there's always the fallback of chat to get quickly back in the conversation, to get quickly back in the meeting. And so one of the things I always emphasize to the teams is always make sure you have multiple channels open. Don't just have a web meeting. Don't just have a phone conversation, but try to make sure you got multiple ways to reach team members, especially when you're in an online meeting, because you don't want to waste time dealing with the technical issues. So so the short answer to your question, is it always phone only? It's never phone only. There's at least phone and chat, sometimes many other tools involved. And as we said in the last section of the webinar there about tools, we're always trying out new things, trying out new tools, new ways to use our tools. And so we're always looking at how can we make that communication and that multi-channel communication in particular better. So Mike, you got another one?
I do. This is a follow-up in response to what I had mentioned earlier about knowing whether people are performing. So the question was, how would you know if they were underperforming, and what do you do to measure productivity and quality? I guess it's difficult to know objectively if somebody is underperforming. I mean, there may be tons of ways that you can do that, but I find that you tend to get what you measure. If you measure lines of code, you'll get a bunch of lines of code. If you measure bugs fixed, you'll get a bunch of people fixing random bugs. Ultimately, I think a lot of it comes to have you created the right environment in which people can really thrive? Have you provided them the direction they need? Do they know where they need to go? Do they have what they need to get there? And is the management of the company itself getting in the way? And my personal philosophy is just hire really strong people, give them what they need, and tell them where they need to go, and just get out of the way and answer any questions they have and provide support is necessary. So, more specifically, if people are underperforming, it shows up as kinds of smells and symptoms. I think you have things like, I keep having some very talented engineer will start screaming about another engineer and their code quality and things like that. So those things, tend to bubble up to the surface. We have an extensive code review process in place here that I think works quite well in terms of promoting shared ownership of the code base. So, while I can't, point to exact mechanisms that we've instituted to detect, underperformance, we just really haven't needed that. I think that, the support level that we have for the 100 plus licensed users is extraordinarily low relative to industry benchmarks. So, in all honesty, there are some soft measures that detect problems with performance, but in all honesty, it hasn't been a problem for us.
All right, so lots of great questions moving in. So one of the things I mentioned is we're probably not, so several of you have asked about specifics of doing this or details of that. It's going to be hard for us to probably in this time frame to really answer some of those questions. But as we mentioned on the Nexus community site, we will be giving some of that information out. So I don't want you to think that we're not going to be able to address those kind of questions for you. All right, so one that I do think is probably going to be interesting to a lot of folks is how do you distribute the product owner role amongst the team? Is it distributed among engineers? So that is a really interesting question, and I actually joined Sonatype back in March of this year. Mike has been running the organization for much longer. But when I came on board, we have a single product owner. But with the multiple teams, that was becoming more of an issue. So one of the first things we worked on when I came on board is how do we distribute? So we addressed this very question. And so some of the things that we work with is we had several subject matter experts in open source and security and licensing. And so one of the things that we experimented with is, can we get some of these folks to own the epics, and the person who's playing the role of the product owner kind of oversee the epics and let these other individuals manage the details of the epics? In other words, can they be on the daily stand-up calls to see if the teams who happen to be working on stories for that particular epic, if the team has questions, can they be there rather than that Uber product owner, put it that way. And so our Uber product owner, Brian, does a tremendous job. I will say he's probably one of the best product owners I've ever worked with in my 12 plus years of Agile now. He does a fantastic job of trying to spend time with the customers, trying to spend time with our teams, spending time with sales and marketing to vet all the different needs and to make sure there's clarity on where we need to go and what the teams need to build. But he can only be in so many places at once, even with all these great tools that we have. So we've tried the spreading out the the product owner role that way. So we have a product owner team essentially where these individuals meet on a regular basis. So somebody else had asked a question about Scrum of Scrums. So we do somewhat do the Scrum of Scrums, but with the product owner team. So the product owner team meets daily. They kind of see what are we seeing not only across the teams, but what are we hearing from customers? What are we hearing from support? What are we hearing from customer success? And sometimes we'll invite some of those folks in, even into that daily stand-up, and then even that team will have its own 2-week cycle. We'll go through a bit of a review. How's the release going? How are the epics going? What do we perhaps need to adjust in the release? And then we kind of make some new commitments to ourselves and communicate that out to sales, marketing, customers, and at the same time check in on those commitments as a product owner team in that daily product stand-up meeting. So that's been working quite well now for, let's see, we've been doing that almost 3 months now, and that's worked extremely well. And so we're looking at how do we build upon that as we grow and even add some other teams. So Mike, did you have another one?
Sure. The question was, how does quarterly planning work? So we are continuously planning. I don't recall who it was. I think it was a German general who said plans are worthless, planning indispensable. So we're continually planning. I think we have a fair product with Nexus and a new product in a new market with CLM. In that case, there's a little bit of an impedance mismatch between the two. That said, we're constantly evaluating, progress and reassessing priorities in the backlog. But we do set out, we tend to do more, looking a year ahead. And sometimes they're points, pivot points, and you need to adjust based on the realities of the market, or response from the field, and things that we've learned. But that said, I think the product management discipline itself does an extensive amount of planning overall, and so most of that information is routinely getting communicated back to the appropriate within the development discipline. So there isn't quarterly planning per se, though we certainly do have, kind of annualized corporate planning. We certainly have a financial plan now going into 2015 and strategic objectives, and we set out an organizational roadmap that maps to that, but we're constantly planning from a product priority standpoint.
All right, thanks, Mike. Oh, let's see. So here was another interesting question. So the question was, with our relatively short iterations, 2 weeks, is there too much overhead using what the person says there, start-stop method like Scrum compared to Kanban? So I'll give a consultant type of answer. It depends. When I came on board, one of the challenges we were facing is the meetings were a little bit long, and so we worked on some facilitation. We worked on how to make the meetings more efficient. And when I was consulting, I would do this with face-to-face teams just like I would with any distributed team I work with. Is the meetings are all overhead. So how do you minimize the time spent in the meetings but optimize the collaboration? So make sure it's very clear that people understand why they're at a specific meeting, especially if you have guests, like in a sprint review, that they're very clear on what are the steps to get to the purpose of that meeting. And also, you have to have very good facilitation even in these distributed team meetings. So there's time, usually I'm facilitating some of those larger meetings, but I try to get some of the team members involved as well so that they're doing a little bit of facilitation. And in a way, we're even distributing some of that Scrum Master role. Because I think when you have a mature team, they can take on some of those other aspects of the Scrum Master role and the product owner role, but not take over the whole role. Okay, you still need a product owner who can manage the scope and deal with stakeholders. You still need a Scrum Master who needs to observe the process and make sure the process is working for the team and all included stakeholders as well. But there's still parts of that can even be distributed for the team, because it's good for them to understand those other roles, but it's also good for them professionally to pick up a little facilitation, especially if they get promoted up into higher levels. It doesn't hurt to have some of those skills. So it gives team members an opportunity to look at it and start exploring, do I enjoy the Scrum Master role? Do I enjoy the product owner role? And so what I love is everyone in here is very flexible in trying to take on something a little bit different. So with that in mind, the meetings we have around the sprints are actually very short, and we always kind of check in and see how effective they are. And I have no problem calling the meeting early. If it's not doing any good and we just need to stop, then stop. Don't have the meeting just to have the meeting. It's got to be there to serve the team and the stakeholders. So hopefully that answer helps. All right, Mike, what's your next one?
What techniques have worked well to develop team culture? How to set, do we set core team hours, expected code standard, for example? I think the absolute most important thing, I think back to when I first joined the organization. Oh my gosh, here's this completely virtual organization. I show up day one, and nobody that is in my organization is around. They're all on IRC at the time. We use HipChat now, but are away and whatnot. So I spent a lot of time, just reaching out to people and really getting a sense of what is the existing culture. The last thing I wanted to do, the company had been in business for about 4 years prior to my joining, and they had done a lot. The last thing I'm going to do is go in and tear up a culture that is probably working just fine. And I think it's much better to get in there and get a sense and then make incremental refinements. So that said, some of the most important thing is really, making sure people understood that they were empowered. The default answer was, well, you're trusted to know what you're doing. We expect you to do the right thing and to, risk the consequences. Take risks. You make mistakes, no big deal. Failing fast is just fine. So, making sure it was clear that it was, a relatively, safe environment, that you were not going to get castigated as a result of making, a mistake once. If you made the same mistake several times, well, there might be a bit of an inquiry, but generally speaking, we want people to push the limits. We definitely have code standards. There are core hours, but they're not imposed. I think it's much more important to let the team decide what is going to work well for them. Obviously, we have teams spread across the globe, and so we cover many, many different time zones, and sometimes that creates challenges. But I keep pushing back on the team. Well, figure out how to make it work. What kind of compensating mechanisms can you implement? I think it's much better to do that than for something to be done by fiat and handed down and imposed on the organization.
Yeah, and there was a related question to that, which I'm stealing out of your list there, Mike, about how we manage the cultural differences. I think what I have observed, and I'll be curious to hear Mike's perspective on this, because we haven't talked much about this internally, but I think because many of our folks, many of our developers, our ops people, they are either extensive open source users, or many of them are open source committers, as we said in the presentation. And I think with that, they have already bridged some of the cultural differences that we've dealt with. So as I mentioned earlier, We've got multiple teams that have members in different parts of Europe and the U.S., and they're already comfortable kind of working internationally, but that didn't stop us from doing a very important step, and that's bringing everyone together face to face. So while I'll personally say I love working in this distributed environment, I still value the face-to-face connection, and we do that. And I'll say Mike is very good about telling us anytime, hey, if you need to have a face-to-face meeting, go have it, just do it. And so there's many times where we'll have a small gathering of us to have a face-to-face meeting when there's an important discussion that needs to happen, or maybe an important engineering decision. So with that, that has helped bridge some of those cultural differences. Also, I will say, I know, Mike, you do this, and our product management folks do this, and a lot of our senior folks, when they travel, you make a point of reaching out to whoever's in that area and meeting up with them. I don't know if you want to say a little bit more about that, Mike.
When I'm traveling regionally, you mean?
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, any FaceTime that we can get with a team is great. There's no question about that. To the extent I can go out and have dinner, grab a beer, a drink, whatever. I think that's helpful. I really do. When you have 30 people working for you, it's very difficult to touch base with somebody on a daily basis. I have certain people that I routinely interact with, just by nature of their focus, discipline within the organization. But yeah, if I'm in the general vicinity of somebody, I'll definitely make an effort to reach out and get together.
Yeah. So I think we have maybe time for one more question. Was there one in particular, Mike, that you wanted to cover?
Sure. So let's see. How do you screen for people that will thrive in an environment where developers are given a high level of autonomy? I think great developers tend to thrive with a high degree of autonomy. So I think you look for great developers, and in general, that's going to work out. I think, as I had mentioned earlier, there's some kind of minimum experience required. I think, part of our interviewing and recruiting process, one of the things that we do is the candidates actually need to coordinate their own interviews and set up discussions with, a cross-section of folks from within the organization. It's not a very difficult filter to get through, but we're very clear up front about, what the nature of the organization is like. And in all honesty, of the 15 plus people that we've brought into the company, there have just been no issues whatsoever.
Yeah, and I'll add, so Mike and I, with a couple others, we meet weekly to talk about not just Agile, but kind of cultural issues and many things like this. So there's even that PDCA loop, that plan, do, check, and adjust loop, even at the cultural level for us. And so we look at, all right, what are we noticing in the culture? Are we noticing any issues, or do we need some more diversity? So I noticed in the list, and we're running out of time and I can't address it, but I noticed a couple questions about, do we have some women on the team? And there are, but we would like to have some greater diversity on the team as well. So we're close to the end, and I want to respect everyone's time. We're going to do our best to try to go through the rest of the questions and try to get as many of those answered as we can in some follow-up email. And definitely keep an eye on our Nexus community as we kind of go in depth into some of these areas. And we'll use some of these questions to kind of help drive some future blog posts as well for us. So I just really appreciate all the questions and looking forward to continuing the conversations. Mike, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Not much more than that. Thanks, everyone, for listening. And again, as Mark said, we'll try and get through all those questions for you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.